can't find my rainbird sounds. Where is it? Where is my rain? I can't find it. I lost the one I was really liking. Oh boy. Hello, my holy sisters and brothers. I couldn't find the soundtrack of Rainforest that I usually use. I got stuck. I thought I was going to find it. But we're in the music portion, working with creating the soundtrack and score of our movie, and I had to listen to a whole bunch of stuff, and it fell out of my Apple Music search. Anyway, how's everybody doing? Great to be with you. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Tuesday, Yom Shlishi? Yehud in South Carolina, Shandora in the Bronx, Paula in Chicago, Paula's in the house taking notes, Carla in Brazil, Bill in mid-Missouri, Sharon, I'm so glad you're here, special day, in New Jersey, Bella in Florida, Lucy in Minnesota, Sandy in Michigan, Jonathan in Thousand Oaks, Belle in Texas, John in Maine, as well as Marie. Welcome. Everybody, today's episode of AT Daily is sponsored by our own Sharon Frant Brooks. Please dedicate the shofar blowing on the 5th of Elul to the memory of my mother, Baila Freda Bat Eliezer, whose yard site is today, the 5th of Elul, as well as for my grandmother, Tilla Bat Abraham, whose yard site is 4 Elul, yesterday, and my uncle, Yaakov Yehoshua ben Yecheskel, whose yard site is also today, the 5th of Elul, a very meaningful day on our calendar and in your family. Sharon, we dedicate this shofar blast as well as our learning today to the blessed memory of your mom, your grandmother, and your uncle. Extra long one for the whole mishpacha, for the whole family. Thank you so much, Sharon, for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. May you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings, and we say Amen. All right, it's a double daf. We're going to be learning 2 pages today, pages 6 and 7 here in Tractate Kiddushin, the 20th volume of the Talmud. We're continuing our discussion of Mishna number 1 here in chapter 1. How does a Jewish couple create betrothal? Right, and as we've learned repeatedly, although today we do both the betrothal, known as erisin or Kiddushin, and the marriage itself, known as the chuppah, right, the wedding canopy, also called erisin. These days we do those things on the same day, right? The betrothal and the marriage. In ancient times, the betrothal preceded the marriage by 1 year. Our Mishnah teaches, usually by 1 year, the betrothal is accomplished in the legal jargon. The man acquires the woman by one of 3 means, either by giving her money or something worth money, at least 1 peruta, a small amount, but it has to have that monetary value, or the money itself. That's one way. Number 2 is a document of betrothal, right? So like a contract, a document of betrothal. Or number 3, that they have sexual intercourse together, but with the intention of creating betrothal. Now, the discussion we're continuing today is, okay, they're going to do it through money. But if he's handing her money, or if he's handing her father money because she's a minor and she's going to leave her father's house and go into her husband's house, and she might wait, and we're creating betrothal, right? So even though, she's very young, it doesn't mean she's leaving her father's house right now. But once she's betrothed, she cannot marry any other man. But we're seeing that it's not enough just to hand over the money. There also has to be some language which accompanies the transfer of this item of value, or the money itself, to the effect that, and you are hereby betrothed to me, right? So that you have to express a clear intent to create the betrothal. Now, there's different words that can be used to create that betrothal, but it has to be clear that in handing her the money, he's not just, repaying a loan or saying, please go to the corner store and buy me a 6-pack of beer, but rather, this money that I'm handing to you, you are hereby, if you take it, you are hereby betrothed to me, right? She has to consent, but they have to understand what it is that they're creating through this act of the transfer of the item of value. All right, because we're doing 2 pages today, we're going to skip around a little bit and not read every paragraph. We picked this up where we left off yesterday on page 6a. A few paragraphs from the top. A dilemma was raised before the sages. If a man says to a woman, you are hereby espoused to me. So not the usual language of Kiddushin, right? Mekudeshet, that you are hereby betrothed to me, or the alternative word that also means betrothed, but rather espoused. I mean, espoused basically means married, right? But what we're trying to create is betrothal. So the question is, he says espoused. That's where they're translating it, because it's kind of unusual word. You might also ask, you are hereby married to me. Now, you probably wouldn't say that because we're not talking about standing under the chuppah. But he's going to use this word espoused, which the Hebrew is harufati. Okay, so if a man says to a woman, you are hereby my espoused one, what is the law? So come in here, as it is taught in a baraisa, that with regard to one who says, you are hereby my espoused one, she is betrothed. Why? Because in Judea, they call a betrothed woman a harufa, an espoused woman. Right? So that's kind of the local jargon in the area, in the region of Judea. So the Gemara asks, and is Judea most of the world? Even if this is true in Judea, why should a law that applies in all locations be based on this local custom? Good question. And so the Gemara asks a general question after we skip a paragraph. With regard to all these previously mentioned expressions at the end of yesterday and the paragraph we skipped, there's all these other words that could be used. So how are we going to, what is going to be the law? What language is considered clear enough to create betrothal? So the Gemara says, with what are we dealing? If we say that all these dilemmas about different kinds of words that are being used for the husband the man who wants to create betrothal with the woman, and he's giving her the money, but he's, instead of just saying you are hereby betrothed to me, he says some other formula. So in all these cases, the dilemmas are referring to a case where he was not speaking with her about matters of her get or her betrothal, but suddenly issued this statement to her. From where does she know? I'm sorry. So the Gemara says like this. With what are we dealing? If we say that these dilemmas are referring to a case where the man was not speaking with her about matters of the get or of betrothal, but suddenly issued his statement to her out of the blue, as it were. So then from where does she know what he is saying to her? Right? If he says to her, take some money, you are my counterpart, or you are my gathered one, or you are my rib, or you are my closed one. These are all very weird formulations for creating betrothal. So if he says that to her out of the blue, even if he's handing her money, it wouldn't make any sense. She wouldn't know what he's talking about. Rather, says the Gemara, these dilemmas are referring to a case where the man was speaking to her about matters of her get and her betrothal. But if so, even though he did not say anything, she would also be betrothed if he gave her money for the purpose of betrothal. So, you have a couple, boyfriend and girlfriend. They're sitting around, they're talking. And imagine the guy says something like, I know this is crazy. We haven't known each other that long, but I'm almost thinking like, we could be married. And she says to him, that's not so crazy. And he says, really? You don't think that's crazy? And she says, no, I don't think that's crazy at all. And so then he takes out, $10, which is more than the value of a peruta. And he says, take it. Now, she knows the law that they're talking about marriage and he gives her money. And it's, somehow it's clear in that context that that he is saying, let's be betrothed. Then they would be betrothed even if he doesn't say anything. Really? Is that what the Gemara is saying? Yes, that's what it seems to be saying. But if so, even though he did not say anything, she would also be betrothed if he gave her money for the purpose of betrothal. As we learned in a Mishna in Meiser Sheni 4:7, if one was speaking with a woman about matters of her get or her betrothal, and he gave her a get or her betrothal, meaning money or a document of betrothal in the case of betrothal, but he did not clarify his action. So Rabbi Yosei says this is sufficient for him, i.e. it is a valid get or a valid betrothal because she will understand his intention from the context. Rabbi Yehuda says he's required to clarify the meaning of his behavior. Rav Huna says that Shmuel says the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosei, that as long as she knows what he's talking about, when he gives her money, that the context was they're talking about getting betrothed and he hands her money. So in the context of that conversation, it's clear that handing her money is for the purpose of creating betrothal. It creates betrothal, right? So what matters is not the formula of the language that he uses, but rather the clarity of his meaning in the given circumstances. So if so, even if he had nothing, if he said nothing to her, she would still be betrothed. And this should certainly be the case if he says one of the statements under discussion, right? He can say nothing and they would be betrothed. So all the more so if he uses some kind of a language that says, you know what, take the money and we could be a couple forever. In a context like that, such a statement would make a betrothal, and that is the law. Skip a few paragraphs. And likewise, Rabbi Elazar says that Rabbi Oshaya says, and this is the law, provided that they were discussing the same issue. And the Gemara comments, this disagreement is like a dispute between Tanaim, the rabbis of the Mishnah, on this topic. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rebbe, says, and this is the law provided that they were discussing the same issue. Rabbi Elazar bar Rabbi Shimon says this is the law despite the fact that they were not discussing the same issue. And the Gemara asks, and if they were not discussing the same issue, from where does she know what he is saying to her? They have already changed the topic of conversation, and these expressions on their own are far too ambiguous to be a naked statement, not in the context of a conversation about betrothal. So Abaye said they have not changed to an entirely different topic. Rather, they changed from discussing one topic to discussing another topic within the same topic. In other words, they were no longer speaking directly about divorce or betrothal, but they were still discussing related matters. Therefore, his intention was clear to her when he made his statement. It's like they were having this conversation that I mentioned before, and he says, isn't it crazy? We've known each other a short time. Imagine if we were to spend the rest of our lives together. She says, that's not crazy at all. We could do that. He says, really? You think so? We could just do it? I could pop the question and you'd say yes? And she says, yeah, that would be okay. And he says, but we're so young, we don't have enough money. And she says, no, what are you talking about? You make money, I make money. We don't need so much in this world. He says, you think I make enough money? She says, yeah, you have a car, you have an apartment. I have a car. I have a little money saved up. Together, we have the resources that we need. He says, you know what? Here, take the $10. Right? So even though they were just talking about money and cars and apartments, In that context, it's clear that they were talking about should they betroth themselves to each other and create a life together. The conversation, the general conversation is clear what they were talking about. Then he hands her the money and she accepts it. Yes, a betrothal was created in that situation. And Rav Huna says that Shmuel says the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef, that you don't have to say anything as long as it's clear from the context. And Rav Yemar said to Rav Ashi, but if so, with regard to that which Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says, anyone who does not know the nature of get and betrothal, right, of divorce and betrothal, should have no dealings in them. Meaning, a person who doesn't understand this law thoroughly may not serve as a judge in cases of this kind, lest he permit that which is prohibited. Right? This law, now that we're saying, well, it's very loose, right? As long as it was clear from the context what they intended, then even though he didn't say you are hereby betrothed to me, a betrothal is created. What if later they say, no, come on. I always thought that I wouldn't be betrothed unless I actually said you are hereby betrothed to me. I didn't think that just handing her the $10 would create a betrothal, right? So that's what the groom didn't understand. But he's not the judge if this comes up for litigation in front of a rabbinic court. So what Shmuel is saying, the great sage Shmuel is saying, the one who's going to serve as a judge in that court really has to understand this body of law thoroughly. Because if a judge gets it wrong and says, okay, you didn't intend to create betrothal, I understand what you're saying, I wouldn't have thought so either, there was no betrothal here. So then she, thinking there was no betrothal, doesn't get a get from this guy, and then she goes off and, falls in love with someone else, and they get betrothed, and they get married, but it turns out that the law was she needed a get from the first guy and never got it, then that marriage is not a valid marriage. That second marriage or that second betrothal is not a valid betrothal because she didn't get the get from the first guy. So against that terrible possibility, Shmuel is saying to be a judge on a rabbinic court that's going to evaluate whether betrothal was created or not from a given set of circumstances requires great expertise. So given that, does this principle apply even if that individual did not hear this particular law that Rav Huna says that Shmuel says? The law being that it is prohibited for someone who is not an expert in the law of betrothal to serve on a beis din, on a rabbinic court that's going to handle such a question. Since this type of case is uncommon, should such an individual be considered unfamiliar with the laws of divorce and betrothals? This particular law of Shmuel. So Rav Ashi said to him, yes, it is indeed so. This person is considered to lack the requisite knowledge to deal with these cases. This ruling is an important matter with regard to the laws of betrothal, and one who is unaware of it might err. Now, presumably what they're saying is not one who doesn't know that Shmuel says you have to be an expert in order to save on a beis din. That's not what they're referring to right here. They're saying that one who doesn't know that you can create betrothal even without saying any words at all. That's Rabbi Yosef's ruling. One who's not familiar with that particular law is automatically disqualified from serving as a judge in one of these cases, evaluating whether betrothal was created or not. We skipped several paragraphs. We are on page 6b. Abaye says, with regard to one who betroths a woman with a loan, i.e., he previously lent this woman money, and he now says that she is betrothed to him by means of that loan. So before I tell you what the result is, whether she's betrothed or not, let's just unpack that for a second. So he lent her money. She's like, oh, I need some money. Can you lend me some money? He lends her $100. They're a couple. Later he decides, you know what? We should get married. I think do you want to marry me? Yes. Okay. Let's get betrothed. That $100 that I lent you yesterday, use that as the betrothal money. Now, does that mean she can keep it? Right? Yesterday was characterized as a loan. Today we're going to characterize it as a gift because I'm going to forgive the loan. So the $100 I gave you yesterday, you can keep it and let that be your money for betrothal. Now, that might or might not work, but that's not what he's saying here. What he's saying here is that money that I lent you yesterday, money went from my hand into yours. Let that serve as the betrothal money, but you still owe it to me. Do we think that she's going to be betrothed with that? I wouldn't think so. And in this case, as my father likes to say, I mean, usually the law, as described in the Talmud, jibes with common sense. And that is definitely the case here. No, she is not betrothed. And the reason is that a woman can be betrothed only through her acceptance of money or an item that has monetary value at the time of the betrothal. The problem isn't that I lent it to you yesterday and now I'm saying use it as the betrothal and you still have to pay it back to me. We'll get to that question. The problem is that I gave it to her yesterday, right? And today I'm talking about betrothal. So when you talk about you are going to be betrothed to me, you have to give money at that moment, right? The betrothal language and the transfer of money have to happen together. The reason is that the woman can be betrothed only through her acceptance of money or an item that has monetary value at the time of the betrothal. Although this woman owes the man money, at the time the man states that she is betrothed to him, the loan is not in fact money, but an obligation. Therefore, he does not actually give her anything at the time of the betrothal. By contrast, if he betroths her by means of the benefit of the loan, she is betrothed. But it is prohibited to do so due to the fact that betrothing a woman via the benefit of a loan is an artifice used to circumvent the prohibition of receiving interest, as this enables a husband to gain an additional benefit from the loan. Now, usury is what's being alluded to here. A Jew cannot lend another Jew money and charge interest for it. That's the simple and obvious case of what usury is. But if I lend you money, hey, I really need $100. Can you lend me $100? Sure. Here's $100. And then on condition that you pay it back to me. And then, and I usually will say, and by the end of the week, please, okay? And by the end of the week, he pays me back the $100, or by the end of the year, whatever time limit we set. That's permitted because there's no interest. But if you say, hey, I really need $100, and I say, sure, I'll lend you $100. So I lend this guy $100, and I say, in light of the fact that I'm lending you $100, do you mind, if my son comes over to your house for dinner and has dinner with you guys? Now, that might be a friendly request, but when I am tying it to the lending money, now there's an additional benefit, right? So like he's going to pay me back the money that he owes me, and he's also going to host my son for dinner at his house. That's an additional benefit more than the value of the loan. And that is actually considered interest, and that is prohibited. Because this law is a very strong and stringent law, the sages, whenever their questions come up, this is called ribis, right? Interest or additional benefit when money is loaned, they're going to be very stringent and not allow any kind of additional benefit. That includes where you say something like this: hey, I'll give you $100 and you can pay me back in rice, right? And so I say, well, how much rice is $100? And I say, well, let's look right now in the market. $100 of rice is, 2 bags of rice. Okay. So he says, okay, fine. I'll pay you back next week 2 bags of rice. I say, great. A week passes and rice has gone down in price. Down? Yeah, rice has gone down, right? Rice has gone down. So $100 of rice is actually only 1 bag. But he agreed to pay me back 2 bags of rice. So now, as the lender, I'm doing great, right? I lent him $100. I'm gonna get $200 worth of rice back, or maybe the price went up. Whatever it is, you can't get more even if it's because of market fluctuations, you cannot receive more than you lended out. Okay? So watch how that applies here. So the Gemara clarifies, what is meant by this term, the benefit of the loan? If we say that it means that he established interest upon it when she took the loan, for example, so they violated the law, and he said to her that he is lending her 4 coins in exchange for the repayment of 5. That's clearly a usurious arrangement. It is not permitted, so they made a transgression when they made that arrangement, but okay, they made the arrangement. And then he betroths her by releasing her from the obligation to pay this additional coin. This is a case of full-fledged interest, not merely an artifice to circumvent the prohibition of receiving interest. He is receiving full payment of the loan and an additional benefit. And furthermore, when he releases her from the obligation to pay this additional coin, he is simply foregoing another obligation that she has toward him. He is not giving her anything. This is like a regular case of betrothal with a loan, and therefore she should not be betrothed, and they committed a transgression when they got involved in that usurious relationship. And by the way, if I lend you money and I say, and I'm a Jew and you're a Jew, and I lend you money and I say, hey, I'm going to lend you $100. When you pay me back, give me $120. That's usurious. We're not allowed to do that. And if we ask our friend, who's also a Jew, to write up the documentation of that, okay, so I commit a transgression, you commit a transgression, and he committed a transgression. All of us were involved in creating a usurious arrangement, and that is not permitted. Now the Gemara explains, no, it is necessary in a case where, so it's not that what we're talking about is that he tried to betroth her by initially creating a usurious loan and then saying, you know what, the additional stuff that I said that you owe me, which was interest, I cancel the interest, and in return for me forgiving the interest, use that as the payment of money to create a betrothal. That is not going to work for sure. But is that what we're talking about when we say that they are not permitted to do that because it's an artifice for circumventing usury laws? And the Gemara says no. What we're talking about is a case where he extended the time of the loan for her. When the time for her to repay the loan arrived, he extended the deadline and betrothed her with the financial benefit that she receives from having extra time to pay back the money. In this case, he does betroth her with the value he is giving her at that time. He is giving her something of value, right? She's going to have the time value of that extended time for not paying back the loan. But this is similar to interest, as it is included in the prohibition of interest to pay the creditor for an extension of the time of a loan. You cannot pay a creditor money for him to give you extended time to pay the loan. That is also usurious. And so this will not work because of that artifice that's involved. It might have worked, but it doesn't work. Rava says, with regard to one who says to another, here are 100 dinars for you that I am giving you on the condition that you return them to me. That's permitted. So if he gave these 100 dinars as part of a purchase, now it's getting more complicated, he does not acquire the item as he has not given the seller any money, right? So if I say to you, here's 100 dinars on the condition that you pay them back to me. Okay, so now we just created a permitted loan. But if I say, here's 100 dinars on condition that you pay them back to me and you give me, that chair, because I like it, it's your chair and I like it, so I'm going to give you 100 dinars, you're going to pay it back to me and give me your chair. Well, now it's actually a loan with interest, and that is not going to be permitted. And so therefore, the loan works, but the chair doesn't. So I do not acquire that item as I've not given the seller any money for the chair. And similarly, with regard to a woman, if he gave her money for her betrothal on the condition that she return the money, she is not betrothed because he didn't give her anything. If one gave money in this manner for the redemption of his firstborn son, for which a priest must receive 5 selah coins, his son is not redeemed. If one does this with regard to teruma, i.e. he gives produce to a priest as teruma on the condition that the priest will return it to him. Now this is interesting. You would think this is the same case. if we're saying that if I give you something and you have to give that thing back to me, then I haven't given you anything that would be used as consideration for you to give me some other thing of yours, then why would it work? We have an obligation to give a priest teruma, right? The first 2% of the produce from our field in the land of Israel, when the temple is standing, there's a teruma obligation, tithing to the priest. So have I fulfilled my obligation if I say to the priest, okay, here's your teruma, but on condition that you give it back to me? On the one hand, it's like, how could that possibly work? I didn't give it to him because he has to give it back to me. On the other hand, I did give it to him. He received it, right? So I fulfilled the obligation of giving teruma to a priest. It was on condition that he returned it to me, but the first half is I gave him teruma. So could that possibly work? If one does this with regard to teruma, i.e. he gives produce to a priest as teruma on condition that it will be returned, he has technically fulfilled his obligation of giving. Once he gets the teruma back, it belongs to him, as he is the original owner, and although it is prohibited for him to eat it, because only a priest can eat teruma, he may sell it to a different priest. But it is prohibited to do this, i.e. give teruma in this manner, ab initio, because this priest receiving the teruma appears like a priest who assists at the threshing floor, as he presumably agrees to this arrangement in return for some gain, right? You can't give teruma to a priest where he has to give you something in return, because then you're not giving it to him. Right? So they're going to be very strict. Now, this is not a class about teruma today, but it's interesting that technically it might work, but they're going to prohibit it because of the appearance of impropriety, not because it is, not because it just technically does not work, because it kind of works. Now, the Gemara asks, what does Rava maintain? If he maintains that a gift given on the condition that it be returned is called a gift, well, then this should apply not only to teruma, but even to all the other cases, i.e. it should be considered a valid gift in all the above cases. And if he maintains that a gift of this kind is not called a gift, then even with regard to teruma, it should not be considered a legitimate form of giving. And furthermore, Rav is the one who says a gift given on the condition that it be returned later is called a gift. As Rava said, now here's where... what would it be? What kind of a gift is it if I say, here's a gift on condition that you return it to me? What kind of a gift is that? That sounds ridiculous. But there is a context where we do that all the time. And that is sukkos, right? Sukkot. Where you need to make a blessing over the 4 species, right? Including the etrog. The etrog, or the citron in English, the lemon-like fruit that we use at Sukkot. We're going to use it, next month. Is it next month, basically? You need to have one, and you need to be its owner when you make the blessing over to fulfill your obligation of making that blessing during the holiday of Sukkot. So in that situation, I will give it to my friend as a gift, on condition that he gift it back to me after he's done. So that at the time he makes the blessing, he's the owner of the etrog, and at the time that I make the blessing, I'm the owner of it. So that's a situation where this conditional gift giving actually works, right? As Rava said, that if one says to another on the first day of the festival of Sukkot, take this etrog on the condition that you return it to me, and the recipient takes it, recites a blessing over it, returns it, he has fulfilled his obligation despite the fact that one must own the etrog he uses for the mitzvah on the first day of Sukkot. And if he does not return it, he has not fulfilled his obligation, as the original owner gave him the gift only on the condition that it would be returned. If it's not returned, the condition was not fulfilled, and he never owned it when he had it, right? When the second guy had got it. And this indicates that in the opinion of Rava, a gift that is given on the condition that it be returned is considered a gift. So rather, Rav Ashi said, in all these cases, the gift is acquired, except for the betrothal of a woman, because a woman cannot be acquired by means of a symbolic exchange. We already had that law, and now we see why it's so important that a symbolic exchange does not work. Rav Huna Mar, the son of Rav Nehemiah, said to Rav Ashi, we say this in the name of Rava in accordance with your opinion, not in accordance with the previous ruling. But at any rate, whichever name you're saying it in, it works, right? So you can have a gift that is conditional on it being returned, but you cannot do that in the case of betrothing a woman. If you're going to use money or an item of monetary value to give it to the woman and say, you are hereby betrothed to me, it cannot be on condition that she then return that item. It has to be given freely to her. Rava says that if a woman said to a man, give 100 dinars to so-and-so, and I will be betrothed to you by means of these 100 dinars that you give to that individual. Do you think she's betrothed then? Interesting, right? So I need to give her something freely and not make some condition that she give it back to me, and I can't loan it to her, and it can't be part of a loan, it can't be forgiveness of a loan. I have to give her something of value at the moment of the betrothal. But what if she says, you know what, don't give it to me, give it to that guy because I owe him $100. So give him $100, pay off my loan for me, and that will be something of value for me, and you can betroth me through that. Will that work? Yes. If she says, give 100 dinars to so-and-so and I will be betrothed to you, she is betrothed. And this is derived from the halacha, the law of a guarantor. How so? With regard to a guarantor, is it not the case that he commits himself to repaying the debt even though he receives no benefit, as the money from the loan is given to the debtor? And with regard to this woman too, even though she receives no benefit at that moment, the money's given to someone else, as the 100 dinars are given to someone else, nevertheless, she commits and transfers herself to the man who gives the money, because she does receive a benefit, right? It might not be that, I made it the case that she says, well, I owe that guy $100, so give the $100 instead of to me, give it to him, pay off my loan. That certainly works. But what if she says, the 100 dinars you want to give it to me, give it to him, and I will be betrothed to you? Then does it work? She has no underlying loan with that other guy. You're not paying off a debt that she owes, but she said, give $100 to that guy. Or like, give $100 to my grandma. I want to give a gift to my grandma. So give it to her. And then I will betroth myself to you. She has ascribed value to the giving of money to that third person because she's willing to commit herself in betrothal in exchange for that. And that makes it a valid transfer, and the betrothal works. Now we're on 7a. Skip a few paragraphs. Rava raises a dilemma. If a woman said to a man, here are 100 dinars, and I will be betrothed to you. Wait a minute. She's going to give him the money? Now, we already covered this, didn't we? Didn't we say that betrothal is only created when he gives her money and says something to the effect of, you are hereby betrothed to me? Or now we say he doesn't have to say those words as long as in the circumstances, the language, whatever they've been talking about, it's very clear to both of them that they're creating a betrothal by the transfer of this money from him to her. So how could we possibly create a betrothal where she says, here are 100 dinars and I will be betrothed to you? How could that possibly create a betrothal? Mar Zutra said in the name of Rav Papa, she is betrothed. What? How could that be? And Rav Ashi said to Mar Zutra, if so, this is an example of a case in which property that serves as a guarantee is acquired with property that is not guaranteed. Land is property that serves as a guarantee and is, as derived by way of a verbal analogy, the same applies to people, meaning slaves. They can serve as a guarantee. Money is the kind of property that does not serve as a guarantee, right? Slaves, and you can say brides, right? So, because a woman is acquired in betrothal. So how can you say that, since people serve as a guarantee in the form of slaves, that obviously marriage is not slavery, it is not, but how can you say that that she is going to say, I will be betrothed to you if you take this money? If you take this money. And then he would have to say, okay, I accept the money and you are hereby betrothed to me. How could that possibly work? And the answer is because somehow him taking money from her is going to provide value to her. Not because she gave him money, but because that act of the giving of money provides something of value to her. How could that possibly work? Here's how Rav Steinsaltz explains it. If a woman said to a man, take these 100 dinars as a gift, right? Not for the purpose of creating betrothal, right? He has to give her money or something of value, right? She's saying, take this money as a gift from me. So that money in itself doesn't create the betrothal. But listen closely. If a woman said to a man, take these 100 dinars as a gift, and I will be betrothed to you, and he took the money, and he said, you are hereby betrothed to me through the benefit that you have from my acceptance of your gift. She is betrothed, provided that he is an important person. What? Because what's happening is she's marrying up. Somehow he's a celebrity, he's a prominent person, he's somehow a VIP. There's something important about him. Normally, she couldn't marry this guy. He's too rich, he's too popular, he's somehow above her station. But she says, look, take this money from me as a gift. I want to be betrothed to you. And he's like, you know what? Okay. I'll take this money from you, and now you are betrothed to me through the benefit that you receive from me taking a gift from you. It's very strange, but it works. Now, the authorities add that the court must be very cautious before determining that a man is not important, thereby allowing her to marry without receiving a get, to marry someone else after this little thing goes down, and then maybe they end up not getting married. And we say, well, she gave him money. He didn't give her money. There was no betrothal. No. We're not going to say that. You're going to say, no, that guy really wasn't important, so this arrangement didn't work. She's going to have to get a get from this first guy before she goes and remarries, right? This ruling indicates that most people are considered important with regard to this law. The law is in accordance with the opinions of Rav Papa and Mar Zutra. So this is a very complex, nuanced little interchange and exchange between them where, it turns on, he has to give her something of monetary, not symbolic, but monetary value. Now, sometimes it is worth money, right, to give. Like if you think about people who donate money to politicians. Who's giving money to who? The donor gives to the politician. Who's getting value? Really, only the politician should be getting value. The donor should be enough for him that somebody he believes in is going to be, running the city or running the country. But in the real world, the donor who gives a lot of money to a politician expects that politician is going to take his phone call when he calls up and he's trying to get a zoning permit passed or something like that, right? So that donor is expecting to get value. That's corruption 101, right? But you see how somebody gets value from giving money. And if the one is if she is receiving that kind of value, it could be used for betrothal. But because it's so nuanced and complicated, you see Shmuel's ruling from earlier that a judge, a rabbi who's going to evaluate whether a betrothal was created or not, whether she then needs a get or not to remarry, that judge better understand this body of law deeply, profoundly, thoroughly. Okay, skip a few more paragraphs. Rava says that if a man says to a woman, be betrothed to half of me. Now we're entering the realm of the hypothetical. Who would ever say such a thing? But we're testing our understanding of the law. So Rava says that if a man says to a woman, be betrothed to half of me, she is betrothed. But if he said to her, half of you is betrothed to me, she is not betrothed. Abaye said to Rava, what is different between the two cases that if he says half of you is betrothed to me, she is not betrothed? Is it because the merciful one states when a man takes a woman and marries her, indicating that he must take a woman and not half a woman? Well, so too, the merciful one states a man and not half a man in that verse. So Rava said to Abaye, how can you compare these two cases? There, a woman is not eligible to two men. If one attempts to betroth half a woman, it means that he wants to leave her other half, for someone else to marry. And this is impossible. A woman cannot be married to two men. But isn't a man eligible to marry two women? And when he declares, be betrothed to half of me, this is what he is saying to her. If I wish to marry another woman, I will marry another woman. As we've discussed previously, under Torah law, a Jewish man can have more than one wife. Like Jacob had 4 wives. You could say 2 wives and 2 concubines, but at the very least, he was married to both Rachel and Leah. So a man can have more than one wife. A wife cannot have more than one husband. Now, as I mentioned earlier also, it was Rabbi Gershom, who was known as the light of the diaspora, passed a law, issued an edict, a decree that it is no longer permitted for a Jewish man to have more than one wife. And he said that 1,000 years ago, approximately 1,000 years ago. And since then, it has been the law throughout the entire Ashkenazic world that a Jewish man cannot have more than one wife. It must be only one wife. The Sephardic community didn't accept that decree, but you will travel far and wide around the world and throughout every Sephardic community, and I doubt you'll ever find a Sephardic Jewish man who has more than one wife. The legends say, yeah, there was this one guy, one time. You won't really find it. It doesn't happen in the real world. Basically, it has been the law for 1,000 years that men cannot have more than one wife. Now, what's interesting is it's been that way for much longer than 1,000 years. I read an article, I was just looking into this before today's class on Chabad.org, and the writer, I forget the name of the writer, but he said, he researched rabbinic literature pretty thoroughly, right? The Talmud and the Midrash. And he couldn't find anywhere a situation where, a dilemma was raised, or an incident occurred, right? Where like a true story, not a hypothetical, was being discussed somewhere in the Talmud or in the Midrash about a man actually having more than one wife. It just never happened. It could happen. It was legal for it to happen. There might have been a case here and there, but it was so far out of the mainstream as to be, for all practical purposes, something that didn't happen. And what you do find throughout all the mystical literature is this idea that a husband and wife, are beshert, right? They're soulmates. They were destined for each other. They're two halves of a whole who were destined to find each other and join back together, right, in their primordial state. That doesn't really leave room for multiple, wives for this man. God provided for it in the Torah. It's possible. But his explanation, the rabbi in this Chabad article, was really, that situation is for the once-in-a-blue moon guy who he's obligated to procreate. His wife is barren. He loves her. And he doesn't want to divorce her in order to marry someone else and have children. And so that's why he wants to have 2 wives. And he can find a second wife who agrees to the situation. Okay, there's a possibility, but for all practical purposes, it doesn't happen. It hasn't happened. It's hardly ever happened. And for the last 1,000 years, it really has not happened. Okay. Where am I? Now we go to 7b. Skip some more paragraphs. And Rava raises another dilemma. If one said to another, let your 2 daughters be betrothed to my 2 sons with 1 peruta. Now we said that the minimum amount of money that a man gives a woman to create betrothal is 1 peruta. So now one father says to another father, hey, my 2 sons are going to marry your 2 daughters, and I'll give you 1 peruta for the whole thing. Does this work? The Gemara explains the two sides of the dilemma. Do we follow the giver and recipient? And as the giver bestows one peruta and the recipient receives one peruta, there is money here, since one peruta is considered money, and that's the minimum amount, and therefore the betrothal is valid. Or perhaps we follow them, i.e. those affected by the issue. In this case, 2 sons and 2 daughters, and there's not one peruta for each couple. The problem is left unresolved. Taiku. Rav Papa raises another dilemma. If one man says to another, I hereby acquire your daughter and your cow for one peruta, what is the law? Do we say that he meant your daughter should be betrothed with half of one peruta and your cow purchased with the other half of the peruta? In which case the betrothal, neither the betrothal nor the acquisition take effect. Or perhaps he meant your daughter should be betrothed with one peruta and your cow should be acquired by pulling, right? Acquired just by the symbolic pulling, meaning give me your cow as a gift, right? Our kids are getting married. Give me your cow as a gift, and I will acquire it by pulling it to me, not by an exchange of money. The perutas for the betrothal, and therefore the betrothal would work, or was it half and half? In which case it didn't work. This dilemma, taiku, shall stand unresolved. Rav Ashi raises a dilemma. If he said, I hereby acquire your daughter and your land with one peruta, what is the law? Does this mean your daughter should be betrothed with half of one peruta and your land acquired with half of one peruta? Or perhaps it means your daughter should be betrothed with one peruta and your land should be acquired through an act of taking possession. Like I go in and, transform your land a little bit. And the question is also left unanswered. And the Gemara again says the dilemma shall stand unresolved. I'm very close to done. Questions or comments, get them in. The Gemara relates, there was a certain man who betrothed a woman with silk garments. And Rabbah said, an appraisal of the value of the garments is not necessary, as they are certainly worth more than one peruta. Rav Yosef said, an appraisal of the value of the garments is necessary. And as the man did not determine the value of the silk garments before the betrothal is not valid. And the Gemara comments, if he said to her that she should become betrothed to him by any amount, regardless of the value of the silk garments, everyone agrees that the garments do not require appraisal, as they are undoubtedly worth more than one peruta. Conversely, if he said to her that they are worth 50 dinars and they are not worth 50 dinars, then everyone agrees that the betrothal is not valid, right? If he says to her, here, let us be, I hereby betrothed to you and I'm giving you 50 dinars worth of silk garments, and it turns out he only gave her 20 dinars of silk garments, it's still much more than one peruta, but he violated his word. He said he's giving her 50 dinars and he gave her less than that. And that's why the betrothal does not work. Now, they disagree when he said that they are worth 50 dinars. And in actuality, they are worth 50 dinars. And Rabbah said an appraisal of the value of the garments is not necessary before the betrothal, as they are surely worth 50 dinars. And Rav Yosef said an appraisal of the value of garments is necessary because the woman herself is not an expert in appraisal, and she does not rely on his assessment since she is unsure if the garments are actually worth 50 dinars, as he claimed. She does not agree to be betrothed, or she would not if she realized what the law is, and so there is no betrothal. And where did the law come out on this question? If one betroths a woman in an ordinary manner with a regular item, it is not necessary to appraise the item beforehand to see whether it is worth at least one peruta. Rather, if it is worth at least one peruta, she is betrothed. If he said to her, be betrothed to me with this item that is worth 50 dinars, and he did not appraise it first, she is betrothed only if it is worth that amount. And this is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbah. Rabbeinu Tam writes that this applies only to an item whose value is somewhat known. By contrast, items whose value is not well known, for example, precious stones, require appraisal first. Therefore, it is customary to betroth a woman with a ring that does not contain a precious stone. Additionally, it is customary for the witnesses to evaluate whether the ring is worth more than one peruta before the betrothal takes place. And this is the cover of the Koran Talmud that we're using. and that's a very enlarged ring from medieval times, I believe, that was used to create betrothal. And it's an elaborate and beautiful ring with a lot of workmanship in it, but what you notice is no precious stone. And that's why we have to keep distinguishing in our minds the modern notion of engagement from the traditional notion of betrothal, right? Engagement, which is done with a diamond ring, that's secular idea. We don't hold by that under Jewish law. Betrothal happens with an item of value and traditionally no rock, right? No diamond, no precious stone on that ring. And that's why, right, in modern times, there is a ring, right? There is a ring. You become betrothed to me under the laws of Moses in Israel. You say that under the chuppah when we get married, because nowadays we create betrothal and marriage on the same day. But when he gives her that ring, that's for the purpose of betrothal, giving her an item of value. And that's why the wedding ring does not have diamonds on it. It can be precious metal, but not precious stones. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. Let's see if you've got questions or comments. Sharon, etched in my memory is the shofar blasts every day of Shiva for my mother. Right, so when Sharon's mother died, since she's having her yard site today, it was Elul, so there were shofar blasts every day of the Shiva. And she says, I never knew my grandmother. She died in Poland when my dad was 12 years old. My uncle died the night of my mother's yard site. He was in Shul with us for his mother's yard site. He was my New York dad. He was my dad's brother. And at 94 years old, read Torah at Mincha, and he died that night. How blessed to have your last action to be reading Torah in Shul. Wow, Sharon, thank you for sharing that. If you're coming in late, Sharon sponsored today's class in memory of her mother and her grandmother and her uncle. And apparently, and your right, your great aunt also has this yard site. Wow, I mean, what a meaningful day in your family lore. Wow, Shan, thank you for sharing that. And Eduardo Picel says, how about if you are a banker, right? So this idea that Jews cannot lend to other Jews at interest. Now, Eduardo says, well, wait a minute, I had an uncle, back in Chile who owned a bank, and he surely was lending money from that bank to other Jews. Now, there are ways to create a legal arrangement that is not usurious, so that people can make a living. And that's why that's way beyond the scope of our conversation today. But the way I understand it is that what you really do is you create a loan that is not owed from the debtor to the lender. Rather, the debtor will owe the money to a beis din, to a rabbinic court, and the rabbinic court will assign the proceeds of the loan, to the lender, right? So there's ways to create a legal arrangement, but it has to be done properly, and it's not just done among individuals, right? And it's also true that a lot of people violate this law. I mean, a lot of people are not even aware that this law exists, and they do it all the time. They don't realize that it's a transgression. But to do it properly and legally, and this comes up, now, can you create an investment? Of course, Jews invest in each other's businesses all the time. That is not a loan, right? But if you issue a bond, some kind of a debt security, which will surely have some kind of a benefit to the lender or the purchaser of the debt security, there's going to be ribis involved. There's going to be interest involved. And if you have, observant traditional Jews involved in these kinds of arrangements, they will go the distance and make sure that the legal documents are drafted properly to account for that, right? So regular investment, no problem. That's creating a partnership of sorts. But debt instruments can be problematic. And, consult your local Orthodox rabbi, if you're getting involved in some kind of a loan with other Jews. Okay, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Wednesday at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great night.